it's a really important personal journey that you get a lot out of no matter the outcome. I feel so much more in tune with my body, with my goals and what I want, and this ability to shift, because life's going to continue to not unfold in the way that I wanted or thought.
So Maureen, you and I have very similar stories, and I want to unfold that, unpack that, share that today. So I'm already grateful to you for sharing yours with the public. I don't think 6 years ago, when you first came to my office for acupuncture, you would have ever in a million years thought that we'd be sitting here today.
Yep.
Right? But now you're a mom. You started out as diminished egg reserve case, somebody who hadn't had a period for how many years?
There was just a very irregular cycle my whole life.
Okay.
Actually, every 6-9 months, just never regular.
Right. So let's jump into your story and start with that, right? You hadn't had a period, and what made you think acupuncture might make a difference?
This story started with, it was 6 years ago. It was just before I turned 35. And I always knew I had a dream that I wanted to be a mother. And the circumstances that were going to allow that, hadn't yet come together. And so friends of mine had frozen their eggs. And so I decided to pursue that process and ended up with Dr. Beck, who, when, as you mentioned, I had low reserve, and of the eggs that were there were this small kind of not sort of uniform shaped, and all the indicators that would say, this is something you need to think about now, and we need to intervene if you have dreams and goals of becoming a mother. And Dr. Beck brought me to you, and she said, listen, before we actually do anything, I want you to go see Danica. She does amazing stuff, and go follow her program, and then come back and see me in a few months, and let's see where you're at.
Mm-hmm. So that made it pretty easy for me compared to some of my other new patients where I have to explain to them what the seed program is and help them understand that they need it. Luckily, Dr. Beck had already told you to go do it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you pretty quickly went into seed fertility. Mm-hmm. And what did you think of what I had created? By that time, it was online.
Yep.
And what was your initial reaction? Were you, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. When that was presented to you, did you feel overwhelmed or broken or excited?
Probably a combination of all of it. I'm a go-getter. So the fact that there was actions that I could take after getting the information from Dr. Beck felt good, but also felt really daunting and really overwhelming. Not trusting really in my body to date, just given the history that I'd had and the results that I was given. And so I remember that first, it was a Tuesday evening, come after probably a busy day of work, and sitting in the back room of your old office, and we talked for about an hour, and it was so different than what I had thought. That first appointment is come in, and I'd been to acupuncture before, but it was a lot more transactional in other settings, and it was just you just really think about the whole person and the whole. The whole story. And so I did. I think we then ended up seeing each other almost every week, and you introduced me to seed, and really it was so intuitive that it just shocks me that it isn't more central to the way that we as women are sort of educated and supported in the medical field over the course of our lives. It's foods that you already eat, but it's thinking about when to have them and maybe supplementing with a few new things like the raw milk, or I ate a lot of soft boiled eggs to get that
cholesterol.
Exactly. But really tying that to the weeks of your cycle and recognizing that there's hormonal events that need to occur, but that you can naturally impact those. I'm from the generation that you were just given birth control whenever there was any, issue in your teens, versus really thinking about the root cause and how you can impact that. And so I was just ahead of this, looking back through my own sort of notes in history. And we started that. I came to see you at the end of February. And 1 month later, I got a period and have had it every month until my pregnancy, that we can talk about on this since then.
Yeah. See, so there was a reset button that we pushed that day together, where somehow you were disarmed, or, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
The energy shifted. I think the energy shifted. I mean, you're all about the energy, right? That was always where we started every conversation, and the homework you gave me. And I think there was even a few sessions where we literally had like a tough energy, like exorcism, like get it out of your system to clear the way for what is supposed to come.
Yeah. And I am so in the present moment when I'm in the treatment rooms that I couldn't even remember what it is that we did that would be that. But I know reconciliation, as my therapist was here recently talking about grief recovery.
Yeah.
And the role that grief plays. And grief doesn't mean that somebody in your history died and left you so sad, but changes had happened. And then certainly getting this poor prognosis, you have a low AMH, you have a low egg count, and you weren't even having a period. Now I'm going back to that day in 2018, and I'm remembering you presented, and you were noticeably on the thin side. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, this is going to be about food. But then we were able to talk about, because I saw on the form, you wanted to do egg freezing. Mm-hmm. So immediately that led me to be asking questions about where you are in life. And that means tackling this idea or the situation that you weren't where you thought you should be at that age. And that's so common across the board, whether it's an egg freeze or a fertility case. If we're 40 or 38 and we thought we would have 3 kids by then we got to start there. So in your case, for it to be that you were doing egg freeze, that clearly wasn't in your plan, right? to be making some insurance that you hope will work later on. And now here we are trying to normalize that, to get women more informed, more empowered. As Dr. Beck explained in her episode, there's no such thing really as an insurance, but the stuff that we're doing to help with nutrition and mindset can give the idea, and it seems to be true, that those eggs coming through as insurance, they thaw better, they fertilize better, they have a better chance. And I like to explain to the women that if we can change as much at the beginning as possible, then we can change the outcome. Yeah. So a lot of that stuff would have been discussed in your first visits. And for you to be a go-getter like you are, then you could run with that. Yeah. And it would be up to you whether or not you decided to hold on to the loss of a dream or the way that you thought it was going to go, or to just like pivot. Yeah. And pivot you did.
I did. It's funny that you say that, though, because I think in our first appointment when I was introducing myself, I said something exactly along those lines. I always have known I wanted to be a mother. I never thought that this would be where I would be at and how this would all start. And I think what ends up happening is there's a lot of the work that I did and was able to do that has now brought that gift to me. But almost more so, it's a really important personal journey that you get a lot out of, no matter the outcome. Mm-hmm. I feel so much more in tune with my body and with my goals and what I want, and this ability to shift, because life's going to continue to not unfold in the way that I wanted or thought.
Yeah. And throw surprises at you, and then how you will pivot and pivot and pivot again. Yeah. Right. So it kind of showed you're not in control, and maybe you don't need to be.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, I still really want to be most of the time.
Be. All of us sure want to be. And
it's a journey.
Yeah. One of the things for me with getting to Kira and Jack, as particularly Kira being the first one, I had to keep thinking about, I had to keep telling myself to let go of the need to know how.
Yes.
And when and with who and if. And so we had that in common right off the bat, because we didn't know how your story was going to go, but I knew how it had gone for me. So in my case, there was no AMH lab test back in the Stone Age when I was reproductive age, but there was FSH, and mine was elevated at 21 points. Yours was a low AMH score, if I recall. And that would suggest that there weren't very many eggs left, which then puts an urgency on top of, this isn't how I thought I was going to go, and I'm not in a relationship. So it could really be triggering of the emotions and grief and panic and fear.
Yep.
So how did you navigate that? Did you have trusted friends you talked to, or what were you doing with all that hot mess of emotions?
Yeah. I mean, seeing you once a week, I think at that time was really helpful because it just grounded me. Because
it grounded you, and it also gave you an opportunity to talk to somebody that wasn't going to share your story till we put it on a podcast, right? Wasn't going to talk about it, but knew that you were likely feeling all these different things. Right?
You just had so much experience and grace
but you had the openness, and you had a willingness to make changes. So it was the ideal situation for me to make a suggestion and then for you to try it out instead of fighting or looking for a supplement or something outside yourself. You knew that this was going to be an inside job. So let's remember, there weren't very many eggs in the beginning, right?
When I saw Dr. Beck at probably January of that year, I had 11 follicles, which isn't crazy low, but it was low for my age at the time. But again, they were small and various sizes, and so it was that coupled with the AMH. She said, if this is how you continue to present, we should really think about embryos right away.
And I'm remembering her saying, I think she can do better. I think she can do it. Like somehow she put her spidey sense in and she knew. And do you think that made it more possible in your own mind? Because I do think the mind makes this. I don't think it starts with the egg. I don't think it starts with a bunch of vitamins. I think it starts with our mindset. So for your doctor to believe in you, that would be very pivotal.
I think so. And particularly what I have always appreciated about Dr. Beck is she is direct and would not have given me that impression if she didn't really believe that I could have a different outcome. So I think that combined with everything that you provided to me, I was also fortunate if we were to put the first milestone in my journey, which was freezing eggs, we carried on for a number of years before I became a mother. But that actually, through the seed program, through different changes that I was making around making sure I was getting the right sleep hygiene, caffeine, a whole host of things. I was able to go forward with the egg freezing by May of that year. And so I think I felt very fortunate if we think about just the emotional journey that could have happened for reaching that first milestone. I actually was able to see pretty amazing results really quickly through just some of the shifts.
So seeing a lot of good results and changes happening quickly is the ideal.
Yes.
Right? We know that's not always possible. It's hardly ever possible. It's more like you have to have one failure after another, and then finally you'll find your way to the last resort type people in this field or to an online program. But is there something to be said for you came in and you immediately fell in line and you didn't challenge it. And then you immediately saw results. Your body probably took those foods and started using those resources. And then the egg supply responded. As I teach in the seed program, that those good fats and the high minerals that are in certain foods like seaweed or soft boiled eggs, the whole fat milk, that actually calms the nerves. So to use that as medicine is exactly what you did. And in calming, then you're able to reset your hypothalamus, pituitary, and ovaries. And the ovaries, I think they pick up this message of it is safe to ovulate.
Yes.
Versus we're in panic, we're in lack, we're in scarcity. Oh God, another work deadline, another goal at work. And then the ovaries feel that too. And they just think, wow, all we do is go and produce and achieve. And it's a very different messaging than we're going to relax, plump up, and receive the sperm at the right time that we're supposed to. It's a very different mindset.
Yes.
So you saw these results pretty quickly. I'm trying to remember, did you do 2 egg freezing cycles?
I ended up just doing the one.
So let's bring some numbers into this story.
Yeah. So I had about 10 or 11, the first appointment with Dr. Beck at the end of January. Went and saw you at the end of February. Got my cycle back at the end of March. And so then the second cycle, end of April, Dr. Beck had me come back in and I had 20 follicles of very proportional, sort of right size. Exactly. And the AMH had shot way up.
Interesting. So you are an example of where the AMH being low, it actually can shift. And do you remember how it changed?
We still don't fully can trace the jump to it, but I was at like 0.75 and then it was at like 5 something. So I don't know if there was a lab piece, but when
somebody else's lab.
Yeah, exactly. But when I've come back since then, it's always been over like 1.5 or, so let's call it the follicles, the AMH doubled in the time period that we put in the work. And so by early May, middle of May that year, I went through the egg retrieval process. And in that time period, you end up through the stimulation having more follicles than are actually sort of eggs that are retrieved and of the right quality. But I was in the 20s ahead of the retrieval from a follicle count standpoint, and then ended up retrieving 15 and 14 were mature and genetically normal and able to be put on ice.
Right. I don't think they can tell the genetics of the egg.
They were the healthy.
They were
rating.
Mature and they weren't fractured.
Right.
They didn't appear fragile or discolored. And so they were what we would say would be consistent with a good egg.
Yes.
Right.
14 put on ice.
That's so great. So then that was 2019.
That was
the end of
2018.
End of 2018.
2018.
Then what did you do?
So then I relaxed after a pretty big milestone. But I think you and I had ongoing conversations around, 14 given my starting point, 14 was a great outcome. But as Dr. Beck would say, I think at the statistics there, that was at the sort of top end of the range that you're 80 to 90%, able to or sorry, the bottom end of the range of an 80 to 90% able to yield a live birth. So do I do another retrieval? Do I, keep putting myself out there and hoping that I find my partner? And so I held on it for a bit and decided if I were going to do that again, I'd want to give it some time. And then in 2019, I connected with my now partner, Mark. And so I think that changed the equation a bit.
Yeah, it did. And it was so interesting because the quarantine happened soon after you. Like, I remember you coming in and saying, there's this person from my past, and we reconnected. And then it was like the quarantine and everything shut down.
Yes.
And then I saw you when we were able to go back and open the clinic again and whatnot. And you guys had to make some very quick decisions.
Yes. He was living across the country. He moved to Los Angeles during the quarantine
pandemic
that allowed us to try things out, not through distance. And so, yes, life, I think for all of us in a lot of different ways, pretty dramatically changed in 2020.
Right.
But it had some really great sort of outcomes for me in that respect.
For sure. But it's like, who knows if you would have, if you guys would have moved things along and ended up together had it not been for the quarantine.
Absolutely.
So it's just really, really funny how life shifts for us. And we have to shift with it.
That's the key.
Right. Right. So then we started working together again. And then I took some time off. Then what happened for you guys? Because something shifted.
Yeah. So I think through our journey, I think you and I kept coming periodically just because, again, a lot of this is around fertility and the path to motherhood, but I've just found that our work together has really just helped me keep balance and kind of hormonal health, which is important no matter your sort of life goals, family planning goals, et cetera. So you and I were in and out of touch 2020, obviously shutting things down. In the first half of 2021, I had wanted to do just a bit of a health check on where I sat and thought, at that point I was about to be 38. And so I thought, well, gosh, I'm not sure we're exactly ready to go forward with a family at this stage, but should I do another retrieval? How should I think about securing my options at this stage, which was just the ongoing conversation. So you and I were in regular touch, and then I went back to see Dr. Beck for a check-in, and she suggested some of the typical tests that some people, when they're actually in the moment of conceiving, undertake, like the HSG things. Just let's make sure, basically, let's do some of the work while you have this time right now, where you're not immediately ready, but let's answer some questions about how ready you would be if the things were going to change. And so 2021 was like another big moment and milestone where I did the HSG procedure, and through that, they diagnosed that I had a uterine septum.
So similar, this is where our stories start to get similar, because I had the advanced awareness that there were problems by my own detective work.
Yeah.
And as a result of having that, then I was able to correct some things before. So here for you, this awareness, there's a septum. And then the awareness of endometriosis, that conversation came on. Was that
pretty quick? And credit to Dr. Beck, she had said early on, when you present with low numbers without a clear family history or other indicators, because we had run all the classic screens at that point, that can sometimes point to endometriosis, which is hard to diagnose without surgical intervention. And so, again, it's just some of the divine intervention I think has happened in my path. And my story is the uterine septum, Dr. Beck said, I only trust, very few doctors to actually intervene, just given the delicacy of that part of your body. And so she referred me to Dr. Larry Orbach, and he specializes in endometriosis. And he said, well, while we're doing the intervention for the septum, given your history and some of the suspicions that Dr. Beck has, let's do the laparoscopic assessment to confirm whether or not you also have endometriosis. And so that 2021 became the sort of prep and then recovery from the surgery with Dr. Orbach, which they did find very, trace evidence of endometriosis, but I'm sure you're touching on that at some point in your podcast. It's a tricky thing where you can have a lot of presence and no symptoms or impact, and very small presence and very clear symptoms and impact. And so I was probably closer to that, where there wasn't, sort of pervasive endometriosis. There was some sign of it, but it was likely the contributor to my lower count and some of the irregularity that I'd had throughout my life.
Yeah. Well, they are now saying endometriosis is not retrograde menstruation, but it is some type of embryonic problem that happens with differentiation. So the fact that you had that septum, which is a embryonic, that differentiation of those ducts not completely resolving, and then to have some element of endo potentially on your ovaries, diminishing the eggs, creating some kind of inflammation. As I say in the seed program, endometriosis is like weeds in the garden. We got to pull it. And you can have some weeds that show up, and then there are weeds that are permeating the soil underneath. So I feel like in your case, we pulled like two main weeds. We pulled, and that broke up everything. And then you had that surgery, and that whatever inflammation was there was moved away. And then it was a matter of you and your partner kind of deciding, are we really ready? Can we do this? Because you knew how many eggs you had. And so it was kind of like, okay, a gamble. Right. So then our talks turned to being more about, is it the right time? Am I ready enough? So do you want to expand on that?
First was the recovery from the surgery took a long time. Even laparoscopic,
different for everybody, but in your case, and I'm similar. It's hard for me. Some women do it and they bounce back, and like a month or two later, they're like, "What surgery? Didn't miss a beat." The two of us are like so tender.
With all things related to the conversation that we're having, it is so personal. I was up on my feet and walking around and absolutely functional within a week or two, but I just knew my body, because the endo, while it wasn't pervasive, it had sort of shit. Like there was like a shift, literally a physical shift in
your
my pelvis.
hips.
Exactly. So it just took my body a while to feel back to myself. And ready for a next stage of the journey. And so 2022 was more about the year of shifting towards motherhood.
Baby making.
Right.
So pulling those weeds, and you had been pulling the weeds, as we're not getting into the weeds on the emotional details, but we both know you were working through stuff and coming back to yourself and feeling more fertile as time went on, because impediments were gone. Some eggs were in the freezer. And do you have a feeling of what shifted to allow it to work for you guys so quickly? Because I'm remembering it was like 2 months of attempts, and then third time, right?
Yes.
Was the charm.
Yes. Well, it's again where some of our story interacts, and who knows the sort of science or spirit around it, but I felt this being and this like compulsion, like this is supposed to happen, and this is supposed to happen now.
Right.
And maybe it was my little guy. Like Care came to you so many years ago. I don't know, but it felt like my spirit in essence was really drawing me to that this was the time, after all these years of not knowing when or if or how it was all going to happen. Really felt like this was the moment that I was meant to pursue that. But I live in my head, despite us trying to keep putting me in my heart. And, it still wasn't looking like the perfect bow, kind of white picket fence, and in how I thought life was going to unfold. Mark and I are very much life partners, but we're not married at the time that we conceived our son, and so I think there was just some of that debate. And I, again, I think my journey with you over the course of this, it really started off with the science and the food and the physical that we talked about. That was such an unlock for me at that early stage when I was looking to freeze my eggs. And then really that summer of 22, preparing to conceive, it really became about such the spiritual side of what you bring to your patients. And I remember sort of freaking out after we were starting. I was like, oh, wow, I can't believe I'm actually doing this after all this time. And is this, exactly how it's all meant to happen? And you pointed me back to your book, Stick It To Me, Baby, and to the chapter that was all about really embracing what the universe has unfolding for you versus trying to control
Yeah.
exactly how everything is supposed to happen. And that was such a pivotal moment for me in my journey and in our journey. And so then very quickly thereafter, we were able to get pregnant with our son. And I was really sick, but other than that, getting a little emotional. It was a easy pregnancy all in, and a beautiful, healthy boy at the end of it.
So those emotions that you're feeling, they're related to tears of joy and gratitude, and maybe an awareness like, wow, I really transformed that journey. And I saw an opportunity for personal discovery, and it's changed me for the better. Right? That's what I'm picking
Absolutely.
up from you intuitively.
For a long time it had been personal, and then in that, it was really Mark and I coming together and creating this family, and just the miraculous moment that is when that's all able to happen. And I just feel very grateful.
Oh, yeah. I like to explain to the patients, because it can seem like a lot, right? Oh, I got to do emotional work. I got to do spiritual work. I got to change my diet. I got to do acupuncture and do IVF and all that. It can feel like so overwhelming, but it doesn't really have to. It can just be like you decide you want to work out and you have a goal you want to achieve, and then you change your diet and you start working out and you throw some money at it and you make different choices, and maybe you get a coach. Like it's really like pushing the emotions aside just long enough to jump in to the pool of emotions and dive all the way in there. With respect to hearing that little voice, I heard it was Kira. You were picking up on somebody who was ready to come in,
Mm-hmm.
little Soli, and he's such a light, right? So I talk to the patients and I explain all of that work that you're doing creates the starting point for the baby. And that's a good way of shifting it. Instead of thinking, oh my God, all this stuff, it becomes the snapshot for like as good as you can get. So for me, it was like, I declared I'm as spiritually and physically fertile as I'm going to be, as I need to be. And so that is where Kira began. So then I get to be around her every day as a teenager, and I throw some ideas at her, but she doesn't really want to hear or listen. But it's like the starting point of her makes her this very wise little being. And if I had conceived at 36 or 31 when I was told that I couldn't, I would not have been that mature or wise or whatever. So I do think that the work that we do, our kids benefit from. And Sully, he's only 9 months old, so it's too soon to tell, but he's already like Mr. Go-Getter, like going standing.
From the moment he was in the womb, my doctor was like, he's going to be an active little boy. And he is. He has a lot of spirit.
Yeah. And he's got a lot of energy and he's very healthy. Yeah. And the way that you approach what he eats is very different now that you know so much about food, for example, right? So when my therapist was here earlier, we were talking about grief and how to make amends with a situation when it isn't a happy ending. But in your case, you created a happy ending and it worked out for you. What do you think, listeners, as we start wrapping up here, what do you think listeners would want to take away from your story?
I think the two things on my mind as I think about our journey is, oneness is really personal. And, there's many times you and I worked back and forth and you were maybe throwing out some ideas. And I said, God, that one or two really resonates and sounds good to me. And maybe that the raw egg in the milk was never, I couldn't stomach it as much, but the soft boiled with the raw milk worked for me. So I feel like I got all the ingredients in there. So it's getting it to about, the 80%. I think this is not across everybody, but I imagine that I'm not the only one of your patients that is
For sure, no.
a little type A and likes to control.
And to those, I am explaining to them that it's really important to let their own voice be louder than mine or their doctors. And because there was another case where her lining was like 5 millimeters and she was told to abstain, but she listened to herself and they had sex anyway. And turned out she became pregnant, and we all just quickly threw herbs and estrogen patches and some progesterone suppositories, and everything worked out, luckily. But the message is listen to yourself.
Listen to yourself. You're going to hear a lot of advice. Take what resonates in your core and in that inner voice, and no worries if you need to kind of walk away from what doesn't resonate. And so I think that's one of it. And then the other one is really, I feel like it was very instrumental to me to release what I thought should happen, what I thought could happen, and allow some of what was meant to happen to come at me. And even if it feels very different than the life that you'd envisioned, mine ended up, working its way to exactly where I hoped and needed it to be, but maybe the path to get there looked a little bit different. And I'm grateful for all of the learnings that had come along the way, and you're meant to have what you're meant to have.
Yeah. There's a saying, that which you're seeking is seeking you. Mm-hmm. So I do see a really high success rate in my patient population. And I think it's because my women don't give up. Every week when they come in and we do a treatment, starts with eliminating what's different, where they're winning, how they're succeeding. And that is empowering. When you want to give up, to hear how you're crushing it is helpful, right?
Well, certainly my profile.
Yeah, right. But your profile is very common.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Maureen, I'm obviously so happy that it worked out. And it's really fun to be able to remember how it was when we met, and to know where you are now. Yeah, it really is.
I just couldn't be more grateful for your friendship and guidance.
We have some good talks. What are you thinking about doing next? Are you guys thinking of trying again sometime soon?
Just as my whole life has been, I think we're gonna wait to see what the universe has in store for us.
So the planning is kind of like you've paused that and you're just in the present moment.
I
enjoying
am trying to be in
him.
the present, because I have so much to enjoy and be grateful for. And I think it's very important that you choose your words in these conversations, because again, it's so personal. Yeah. I have found for me that if I'm not careful, wishing for what could or should happen next, I'm going to miss appreciating what's right here in front of me. Yeah. And so that's really where I'm focused right now.
It's such a good place to be.